They couldn't destroy your gift, so they tried to assassinate your name. You might not realize it yet, but the most dangerous warfare isn't fought with weapons. It's fought with whispers. The most vicious attacks don't happen in daylight. They unfold in conversations where you're not invited. Smear campaigns are spiritual assassinations disguised as concern. When you're a chosen one, the attacks don't begin when you do something wrong. They begin when you do something right. Let's pause for a fact. Psychological studies show that lies travel 6 times faster than the truth, especially when the truth is inconvenient and the lie is deliciously scandalous. Imagine being someone whose very existence exposes darkness. Now imagine how quickly they'll move to shut you down. This isn't mere gossip or petty jealousy. This is a full-blown, coordinated takedown, one that unravels slowly, publicly, and sometimes even politely. But here's the spoiler. It ends badly for them. Why? Because they didn't count on one thing. You were built with something they can't fabricate or erase: divine receipts. Before we dive into the spiritual DNA of why this smear campaign was so vile and why its conclusion will be brutal, not for you, but for them, let me say, if pettiness were a profession, some of your enemies would have PhDs and LinkedIn endorsements by now. But don't worry, this isn't just a message, it's a mirror. By the end, you'll understand why being misunderstood was the universe's way of protecting what they were never qualified to perceive. Let's go deeper. 1. They fabricated a villain because they couldn't survive a mirror. That's the real story. You didn't hurt them, betray them, or even compete with them. You simply showed up, fully clear, gifted, and unbothered. And that alone was enough to trigger their storm. Most people are comfortable as long as you doubt yourself. They can tolerate you shrinking, questioning, and playing small. But the moment you stand in your truth, the moment you stop performing humility to make others feel tall, that's when they panic. Not because you've changed, but because your confidence reflects everything they've been running from. You became a mirror they never asked for. Your presence, not your arrogance, exposed their insecurity. Your glow, not an attack, unsettled their darkness. Your peace, not a declaration of war, screamed louder than their chaos. They couldn't handle it. So, instead of doing the hard internal work, instead of asking, why does this person's light make me uncomfortable? They took the easier route. They twisted you into a threat, a monster, a manipulator, a liar. That story felt safer than admitting they were never honest with themselves. They twisted your name, bent your motives, repackaged your kindness as control, and your strength as ego. Not because it was true, but because it gave them something to hide behind. They needed others to see you through their manufactured fog, ensuring no one would notice their own shadows. The saddest part? Many didn't even realize what they were doing. Some were so wounded, so deeply rooted in self-denial, that turning you into a villain felt like survival. Yet even after all the lies, the dirty whispers, the cold stares, and the silent treatments, you're still here. Still standing, still glowing. A mirror can be smashed, but it never forgets its reflection. And the truth, even when buried, has a way of rising with receipts. They didn't survive the mirror, but you? You didn't just survive the smear. You exposed everything they tried to hide, without ever lifting a finger. 2. They didn't want you silent. They wanted you erased. That's the part people miss. This wasn't about a disagreement or a falling out. It was strategic. This was a mission. You were never supposed to make it this far. Once you did, the goal became clear. Wipe you out in every way that matters. Quiet your voice, distort your name, kill your influence, and bury your identity under lies so thick that even you would question who you were. It was never just about silencing you. It was about ensuring there was nothing left of you to hear. They wanted to strip your credibility so no one would believe you. They wanted to twist your reputation so badly that even your truth would sound suspicious. They weren't satisfied with you stepping back. They needed you discredited, disconnected, and dismantled. Your presence disrupted too much. Your gift, your energy, your clarity. It didn't just shine, it exposed. It pulled back the curtain on their manipulation, their false sense of control, on the fragile empire they built on half-truths. People like that don't just want you gone, they want you invisible. This wasn't casual, it was deliberate. They fed people stories about you in doses, little digs here, suspicious comments there, all designed to slowly rot your image in the minds of others. And what makes it worse? They did it with a calm face, smiling, acting like they cared, like they were just concerned. But underneath was bitterness dressed as caution, jealousy wearing a mask of virtue. They knew your silence wasn't weakness, it was power. So they tried to provoke you, to make you snap, to react in a way they could weaponize. When you didn't take the bait, they lied louder. If they couldn't get you to ruin yourself, they'd ruin the version of you others saw. But what they didn't know is this: what's divinely assigned cannot be erased by human hands. They tried to delete you, but they only deleted their access to your grace. Now they'll have to live with the echo of the voice they tried to silence. 3. The smear wasn't just gossip. It was psychological warfare. It was calculated, intentional, and crafted to break you from the inside out. This wasn't some petty rumor that got out of hand. It was designed with precision. They knew exactly which narratives to spin, what parts of your story to twist, and who to plant the seeds with. The goal wasn't just to make others doubt you. The goal was to make you start doubting yourself, to make you question your own memory, your own motives, your own goodness. That's what makes this so dangerous. This was a mind game, not a misunderstanding. They didn't scream their lies, they whispered them. That's how smear campaigns work. They don't confront you openly. They move quietly in corners, in casual conversations, in just between us phone calls. They don't want truth, they want control. And control doesn't come from proving you wrong. It comes from making others unsure about you, about your character, about what really happened. This is how psychological warfare plays out. Not through punches, but through doubt. And the worst part is that some of the people who listened weren't even malicious. They were just easily influenced, easily swayed by the performance. Because yes, the ones running the smear campaign were acting polished, calm, sometimes even crying fake tears, playing victim to your supposed cruelty. But it was all part of the tactic. Confuse the narrative, create enough fog that people stop looking for the truth altogether. This was never just about turning people against you. It was about turning you against yourself, making you feel isolated, making you paranoid, making you carry the weight of a lie until you started walking like it was true. They knew that if they couldn't destroy your gift, they could try to destabilize your mind. But what they didn't count on was your clarity, your inner knowing, that quiet part of you that refused to let their noise become your identity. Yes, it was war. Yes, it hurt. But you didn't crumble. And that's what scares them now. You were supposed to fall apart. Instead, you figured it out. You healed. You remembered who you are. And now their entire strategy is collapsing under the weight of the truth they couldn't kill. 4. They didn't just attack your name. They attempted to infect it. There's a difference between speaking against someone and strategically poisoning how others see them. What they did wasn't just about dragging your character. It was about turning your identity into something toxic. They didn't just want people to dislike you. They wanted people to fear being connected to you, to second-guess your worth, your heart, your story, to see you as a walking red flag based on lies dressed up as facts. This wasn't random hate. This was reputation warfare. They treated your name like something contagious, as if associating with you would cost people their credibility or comfort. So they planted suspicion. They used words like, "be careful," and "just watch." Never directly accusing you, but always implying danger. Because suggestion is more powerful than slander. A flat-out lie can be dismissed, but a well-placed doubt, that sticks, that spreads, and that's what they wanted for your name. To be met with raised eyebrows and side eyes, instead of trust and respect. It was subtle at first, then it became consistent. They repeated things often enough that people started repeating them too, even if they didn't know the full story. That's how infection works. Not everyone who passes it on knows they're spreading something dirty. Some thought they were protecting themselves. Others just wanted to be on the safe side. Before long, your name was walking into rooms before you did, wearing clothes you never picked out, speaking a language you never approved. They couldn't cancel you outright, so they tried to make your name unsafe, to turn it into something others avoided, questioned, or whispered about behind closed doors. In doing so, they hoped to separate you from your own power, because they understood something. When your name carries weight, so does your influence. So they tried to make your name heavy in the wrong way, not with honor, but with fear. But here's what they failed to grasp. When your name is rooted in truth, it can't stay infected. The smear might linger, but truth is the ultimate immune system. Slowly but surely, the infection is clearing. Everyone is beginning to realize your name didn't carry poison. It carried prophecy. 5. They turned your strength into a threat. Because it wasn't theirs. Not because you were wrong, not because you hurt anyone, but because your presence made them feel powerless. You didn't play the role they assigned to you. You didn't stay in the box they built with their insecurities, and that made them nervous. You didn't bow when they expected submission. You didn't chase validation when they withheld approval. That's when they decided your strength wasn't admirable. It was dangerous. You walked in self-trust. You spoke with clarity. You didn't need applause to know you were right. And you didn't crumble when they gave you silence. That's what they couldn't stand. They expected you to flinch, to ask for permission. But when you moved confidently without their input, they had to explain it away. Not with truth, but with distortion. So they started painting your strength as pride. They called your independence rebellion. They called your peace fake. They said your focus was obsession. Your clarity exposed their confusion, and your self-control reminded them how little they had. They couldn't understand that your boundaries weren't an act of war. They were acts of healing. You didn't cut them off out of hate. You chose distance to protect your sanity. But instead of owning their role, they played the victim. You changed, they said. What they really meant was, you stopped needing me to define you. And in their world, that's betrayal. They wanted you to keep shrinking, to keep explaining yourself, to keep making space for their discomfort. But you stopped. You stood tall. And they took that personally. In their eyes, you weren't supposed to rise, especially not without their help, their approval, or their blueprint. But the truth is, your strength was never a threat. It was a mirror. And people who haven't developed their own can't stand to be around someone who already has. So they twisted your power into poison, not because you were dangerous, but because they were too insecure to grow. And now, they sit on the sidelines, still trying to control the narrative. But your life keeps proving the truth they can't silence. You were never arrogant. You were just unshakably whole. 6. This wasn't personal to them. It was ritual. That's what makes it more disturbing. You weren't the exception. You were just next in line. These people have a pattern, a playbook, A cycle they repeat every time someone walks in with too much light, too much truth, too much presence. They find someone gifted, different, clear, and they circle like vultures. Not because that person did anything wrong, but because they did what others wouldn't dare. Be authentic without apology. And that's a threat to people who build their identities on performance. You were never the only one they've targeted. You were just the one they couldn't fully contain. That's why it got so vicious. Others bent under the pressure, played small, begged to be accepted back into their sick little circle. But you didn't. You stood tall, confused but unbroken. And that's what exposed them. That's why it felt like overkill. It wasn't just that they didn't like you. It's that they needed to destroy you publicly, to make an example out of you, to warn others what happens when someone refuses to bow to their system. They've done this to people before, but not people like you. Not someone with a soul too loud to smother and a calling too real to fake. You weren't just a nuisance to them. You were a disruption to their spiritual ecosystem. Your purity unsettled their poison. Your refusal to gossip made their manipulation louder. Your emotional honesty highlighted their games. So the same pattern kicked in. Isolate, discredit, distort, exile. It's not personal to them because they're not even conscious of what they're doing anymore. They've normalized it. Tearing down people of substance is their way of feeling significant. It's a ritual that makes them feel in control of the chaos they refuse to face in themselves. But this time, they miscalculated. They picked someone divine, someone spiritually armed, someone not only able to survive, but to expose the cycle itself. And now the pattern is cracking. Because this time, the scapegoat isn't fading quietly. You're rising. And the same ritual they've repeated for years is finally coming undone in full view. The sacred didn't die. It awakened. 7. They wanted a public execution disguised as concern. That was the whole strategy. They didn't show up in anger. They showed up in performance, soft voices, tilted heads, worried tones. I'm just saying this because I care. I don't want to start anything, but people should know. It looked like concern. It sounded like compassion, but it was pure sabotage dressed in Sunday manners. They never said things directly. They implied. They never outright attacked. They suggested. And in that space of carefully placed hints, they created an image of you that was more damaging than any open insult. What they were really doing was grooming people to fear you, to question your motives, to see you as unstable, manipulative, or secretly dangerous, all while pretending to protect everyone else. They wanted it to look like they were saving the community from you, but what they were really doing was orchestrating your takedown without getting their hands dirty. No blood on the sword, but plenty of fingerprints on the handle. It was rehearsed, calculated. The more you tried to defend yourself, the guiltier you looked. That was part of the trap. They created the fire, then stood off to the side yelling, "See? They're burning," hoping no one would realize they were the ones holding the matches. This wasn't honesty. This wasn't accountability. This was character assassination hidden behind fake virtue. And the scariest part? Some people bought it, because the delivery was smooth, because the poison was wrapped in kindness, and because many would rather believe a lie with a soft tone than a truth spoken with fire. You weren't just attacked, you were framed. Every move you made to clarify yourself got twisted into further evidence against you. That's how these kinds of campaigns work. They want you destroyed, but they want it to look like you did it to yourself. That way, they get to play innocent while watching you bleed. But what they didn't expect was for you to survive the scene. You didn't die in their narrative. You outlived it. And now the same mask of concern they wore is cracking, and underneath it is envy, manipulation, and fear of the power they tried so hard to erase. 8. The lies they told about you were projections they couldn't own. The lies they told about you were never really about you. They were projections, messy reflections of their own unhealed wounds, dressed up as accusations. Every insult, every twisted version of your truth, every passive-aggressive jab was them speaking about themselves without realizing it. They weren't describing your character. They were revealing their own. Instead of looking inward and dealing with their baggage, they dumped it on you and called it discernment. They didn't just lie to others. They lied to themselves first. And those lies had to land somewhere, so they picked you. You became the perfect canvas. You had light, presence, clarity. But rather than honor that, they smeared it. Not because you were dark, but because they were, and they couldn't stand the contrast. Your peace was a mirror to their chaos. Your authenticity exposed their pretending. Your healing made their dysfunction louder, so they had to distort you to feel balanced. And here's the worst part. They started to believe the lies themselves. The brain can't hold too much contradiction. So when they saw your goodness but couldn't stand it, their mind rewrote the story to make themselves feel better. She's not kind. She's manipulative. He's not confident. He's arrogant. They're not growing. They're changing for the worse. Lies became their truth because truth made them feel too small. But no matter how much they tried to repaint you, it didn't change the fact that it was their mess on your portrait. And people eventually noticed the brushstrokes didn't match your reality, your energy, your actions, your heart. None of it lined up with what was being said. Because truth has a frequency, and lies, no matter how often they're repeated, can't sustain that vibration for long. What they tried to do wasn't just defamation, it was deflection. They needed a scapegoat to avoid looking in the mirror. So they built a false version of you and convinced others to respond to that version, not the real you. But now the illusion is breaking. Slowly, steadily, the real story is surfacing. People are realizing you weren't the villain, you were the vessel. And the story they told was never about your darkness. It was about their refusal to deal with their own.